Yes, I would like a cookie. Hi there. By the time you see this, you may have already seen the piece I finished shooting just now. This was a skit I wrote to comment in an indirect and humorous way on the tragic situation between the state of Israel and Gaza. If you care about this situation, or even if you just pay attention to the news, you may have noticed that the mainstream media, as well as most mainstream politicians from the left and the right, are siding strongly with the state of Israel, while at most only paying token lip service to the suffering of the civilian population of Gaza. And if you have noticed that, you may be asking yourself, why? Why are the mainstream media and politicians so unabashedly supportive of the state of Israel, even in the face of egregious human rights violations being committed by the state of Israel against the civilian population of Gaza at this very moment? Well, lucky you, you've come to the right place for an answer to that question. A random white American guy shooting a YouTube video in his living room. Because I know the answer to that question. The answer is anti-Semitism. And that seems counterintuitive, I realize that, but let me explain. Anti-Semitism, intolerance toward Jewish people, is one of the oldest and most pervasive and most destructive forms of bigotry. For centuries, Jewish people have been the targets of discrimination, denigration, demonization, desecration, and violence, including the most infamous campaign of institutionalized genocide ever committed. Following World War II and the Holocaust, the Jewish people were finally granted their own independent nation, the State of Israel, located in the traditional land of Israel, the so-called Holy Land, the region of Palestine between the Mediterranean Sea on the west and the Jordan River on the east, with Lebanon to the north and Egypt to the south. The State of Israel has been a political lightning rod since the moment it came into existence in 1948. The State of Israel and its neighbors have been in various states of hostility continuously for the last 75 years. So have the State of Israel and the Palestinians living in the two occupied territories, the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. The longer these conflicts, particularly the conflict between the State of Israel and Palestine, drag on, the more difficult it is for those of us on the outside to judge who are the good guys and who are the bad guys. Take this current situation, this latest episode in the ongoing conflict between the State of Israel and the Palestinians was triggered when Hamas militants from Gaza crossed the border into the State of Israel, killed 1,200 civilians, and took 200 hostages, 24 of whom reportedly are children. It was a horrific act of terrorism that inspired condemnation of Hamas and solidarity with the State of Israel, which was a human and completely reasonable reaction at the time. But in response to that horrific act of terrorism, the State of Israel has carried out an overwhelming counteroffensive that has resulted, as of this moment, in over 3,000 civilian deaths and another 12,000 civilian injuries. Attacks by the Israeli Defense Forces have targeted hospitals and refugee camps. Electricity in Gaza has been cut off. Humanitarian aid has been blocked. The Israeli government has ordered civilians in Gaza to evacuate to the south, then bombed routes of evacuation and ports and the only border crossing between Gaza and Egypt. But while the State of Israel has been doing that, there have also been reports of Hamas ordering the civilian population of Gaza not to evacuate in the face of Israeli aggression, and even going so far as to set up roadblocks to thwart those who did try to leave. Hamas has also continued to launch rocket attacks into Israeli territory and has repeatedly threatened to execute the hostages taken in the initial incursion. So it started with an atrocity, and since then, it's been the State of Israel and Hamas trading atrocities or threats of atrocities with the civilian populations of Gaza and Israel, but especially Gaza, being the ones to suffer for it. It's a shit show. Both sides have almost certainly committed multiple crimes against humanity, but sentiment here in the West is still strongly in favor of the State of Israel, and criticisms and condemnations of the actions of the IDF and the Israeli government have been cautious and few. And the reason for that, I'm saying, is anti-Semitism. Because the Jewish people, who account for 3/4 of the population of Israel, have been the targets of hatred and demonization and violence for centuries, and the last thing any decent person wants to do is contribute to that. The discourse surrounding the State of Israel and everything it does is poisoned with anti-Semitism and accusations of anti-Semitism and suspicions of anti-Semitism on all sides. There are genuine anti-Semites, white supremacists, far-right Christians, Islamist militants, etc., who take every opportunity to paint the State of Israel and, by extension, the Jewish people in general, as evil, as threats to peace and freedom that must be exterminated. I'm talking about unadulterated, literal Nazi shit. On the other side, there are Zionist extremists who respond to any criticism of the State of Israel and or the IDF as anti-Semitic, who use the charge of anti-Semitism to threaten and shame all opponents of the State of Israel, whether they are actually anti-Semitic or not, into silence. You see the problem, I hope. When you know that anything you say which is critical of the State of Israel, or, by the same token, anything you say which is supportive of or sympathetic to the Palestinians can be co-opted by anti-Semites to bolster their bigoted narrative vilifying all Jewish people everywhere, and simultaneously be co-opted by Zionist zealots attempting to smear all criticisms of the State of Israel as anti-Semitic. Under those circumstances, it's easier to either express support for Israel and tack on some qualified statement of sympathy for the Palestinian people, or just say nothing. And that's a shame, because while the actions of Hamas have been inexcusable and should be condemned without qualification, the reaction of the State of Israel has far exceeded anything remotely resembling a proportionate response and bears all the hallmarks of collective punishment, forcing the entire civilian population of Gaza to suffer for the crimes of Hamas. And that reaction should also be condemned in the strongest possible terms. Why hasn't it been? Why has the United States and Europe given the State of Israel a much freer hand than its enemies to carry out war crimes? I blame the Nazis